Welcome to Scandal Water, where the tea is hot and the conversation lively.
Your hosts, Candy
And Ashley,
will discuss a peculiar story somehow related to the entertainment industry. This podcast might not change the world, but it just might satisfy your thirst for an intriguing tale.
Oh, it's that time of day. Tune in and hear what the ladies say. It's time to bend your ear when the silver screen appears. Stories about the stage and screen and everything in between. So come on and join the fun. The curtain opens in 3, 2, 1.
Good morning, Ashley.
good morning.
We are back to talk about a topic that I am really enjoying.
I know, yes.
Mission Blockbuster.
They are some blockbusters too.
They are, and what I love about today's topic is that it's unexpected. I think this one might take some people by surprise because it's a little different than the
Right.
other blockbusters that
Right.
we've covered.
Yes.
Guys, we are talking about Shrek.
Shrek.
The original Shrek. And I thought for our opening, we just recently did an episode on Back to the Future, the beloved Back to the Future.
Very beloved.
Well, one of the things that we talked about that was interesting was the fact that Michael J. Fox was not the original Marty McFly.
That's correct,
That
yes.
Eric Stoltz had been cast in that role first and was replaced. As I started to research Shrek,
You found out it was
did
the
you
same thing.
know that there was
Yes.
also a similar circumstance? What do you know about that?
I know that Chris Farley was the original choice. Well, no, actually, they offered it to, they were thinking like Steve Martin and somebody else, and they thought about Tom Cruise, and then they offered it to Nicolas Cage,
Yes.
who said, no thanks, I don't want to be seen as an ogre. And then they finally settled on Chris Farley, who had recorded, I think, like 95% of the dialogue, and then he unfortunately passed away, so they had to recast it.
Wow, you know your stuff. I shouldn't be surprised. Yeah, I found that they offered it to Nick Cage, and I found a quote from him. This was a 2013 interview on the Today Show where he explained that, quote, "I'm not afraid to be ugly in a movie. When you're drawn, in a way, it says more about how children are going to see you than anything else. And I do care about that."
Well, Nick Cage,
So
we just
that-
love him more and more every episode, don't
I
we?
know. And he said he does not regret turning it down.
Oh,
For that
good.
reason, or at least in
Good.
2013, that's what he said.
Yeah.
I did not know about Chris Farley. I found that absolutely fascinating. Here's what I found out, though, about Chris. He, of course, had become very, very popular. SNL had made him a huge star, and he had also just come out of Tommy Boy and Black Sheep. And so, according to his brother, Kevin Farley, this was in a 2015 Yahoo interview, he had recorded, as you said, most of the movie before his sudden death in 1997. And these are some words that Kevin had to say about the situation. Originally, the Shrek character was a little bit more like Chris, like a humble, bumbling, innocent guy. The studio needed to do what they needed to do. It was a bad time, bad timing, a tragedy. Mike did a great job with Shrek. He knocked it out of the park.
Part of me wonders if it was 95% done, why they couldn't find someone to impersonate Chris and finish it out unless they felt like the story just wasn't right, Because I think they record the voices before they start animating.
They do.
Yeah.
Yes, they do. But now one thing, I'm making an inference here, one thing I do know is that this was a movie that took a long
Yes.
time, something like 4.5 years, and it did have changes that occurred. And
Oh.
so it
He
might
couldn't
have
have re-recorded.
It may have been that they couldn't bring him back in to do those pieces. Well, the other thing, too, is we'll talk about this in a second, but when Mike came in, it actually changed the story. Like, it changed the character because this voice actor had an influence on Shrek himself.
Right.
We'll come back to that. But just to finish out this thought, I actually found a clip of Chris Farley voicing Shrek.
Oh.
This was a YouTube clip that came out not so long ago. So I'm going to play just a short
Okay.
piece of it.
Nothing like a fire and a noble romantic mission to warm the cockles of your heart.
Yeah. I like my cockles room temperature, thank you very much.
Hey, if you're not doing this for cockle warming, why are you doing it?
Yeah. Simple. Fartwad gets his princess, I get what I want.
Which is? Now come on, what do you want?
I don't have time to set it to music.
Oh, this is another one of those onion things.
No, this is one of those drop it and leave me alone things.
Why don't you want to talk about it?
Why do you want to talk about it?
So I could be wrong, but I think some of that dialogue is
It
even
is.
different. So I think that goes back to what we said
Yeah.
a minute ago. The story did change.
Yeah, and Eddie Murphy's character did not sound as manic.
Yeah.
in that. And I know they, or at least I read that they all recorded, I don't know if those two did, but when it was Mike Myers and Cameron Diaz and Eddie Murphy, they all recorded separately.
Yes, they did. Yeah, we're going to talk more about that too. But let's just go ahead and establish the foundation.
Okay.
With our theme for the month being Mission Blockbuster. I believe I referenced that we came across a USA Today article where they had listed all the biggest summer blockbusters from back to Jaws, which was the original,
Right.
through something like, I don't know, 2019. This made the list because this was the biggest summer blockbuster from 2001, and it had a domestic gross, which they adjusted for inflation, of $426.1 million. The unadjusted domestic gross was $267.7 million, and their production budget, unadjusted, was really only $60 million, which is a lot for an animated
It's a
feature.
lot.
It sounds like a lot to me.
It sounds a lot to me.
But when you think about what they brought in, not so much.
Yeah. I also found a fact that says in 2001, 5.5 million DVDs were sold, making it the biggest selling DVD of all time at that time.
Very cool.
Yeah.
Very cool. This same article had this tiny little blurb about Shrek. Here's what they said. Shrek, the animation film about a lovable ogre, featured the voices of Mike Myers, Eddie Murphy, and Cameron Diaz. It opened May 16th in 2001 and was the top box office film in its opening weekend with more than $42 million in unadjusted domestic gross. Now, I found this amazing video called The Behind the Scenes Secrets of Shrek.
Yeah.
Bonus feature spotlight by Universal Pictures All Access. And we're going to hear a few clips from them
Oh,
because
cool.
it was so good.
Oh,
you
good,
should,
good.
If you are interested in the behind the scenes of the original Shrek, you should check out this video. But here's a little blurb, what they said about the film. Winner of the first Academy Award for Best Animated Feature in 2002, Shrek sparked a motion picture phenomenon and captured the world's imagination with the greatest fairy tale never told. Shrek, played by Mike Myers, goes on a 3D quest to rescue the feisty princess Fiona, played by Cameron Diaz, with the help of his lovable donkey, played by Eddie Murphy, and win back the deed to his swamp from scheming Lord Farquaad, played by...
John Lithgow.
There we go. It was directed by Andrew Adamson and Vicki Jensen. Ultimately, they went through some different people. The production company was DreamWorks Animation.
With our guy, Steven Spielberg.
Yeah. Jeffrey Katzenberg was a producer and also the co-founder of DreamWorks. And he had, of course, previously worked at Disney, and it sounded like he did not leave on such happy terms.
Which is probably why a lot of this is mocking Disney.
Exactly.
Yes.
Exactly. But he had a lot to say on this behind the scenes video as well.
Oh, cool.
So we'll have a few quotes directly from old Jeffrey there. So tell me what you know about Shrek before we jump in.
I remember seeing it in the theaters and I remember really enjoying it. And on my rewatch, I was telling you kind of off screen, I enjoyed it, but some of the jokes just were a little too hard for my little tender heart now. I don't know. They weren't as funny as they were the first time. And I don't mean like all the jokes, just the ones. Do you want me to go ahead and say?
Go right ahead.
This is a spoiler, but obviously this film came out in 2001, so
It's not a spoiler.
it's not a spoiler. But when Fiona is singing with the bird and the bird explodes and then she eats the eggs, it was too much. I was like, I wrote in my notes, too far. It hurts my heart. And the other one is when we see the mama bear and daddy bear and baby bear earlier. And then Farquaad has mama bear as a rug on his floor because you could tell she's got her little bow still. And that just, I was like,
That is so funny because honestly, I think that's one of the biggest draws of the
I
film
know,
is its irreverence.
it is
The
very
fact that it
irreverent.
took the most
Yes.
beloved fairy tales of
Yes.
all time and
Yes.
turned all of them on their ear.
It did, but I just, as a person who has animals and pets, and
I
I'm not
know.
like seriously like, oh, Shrek, but it just was like, oh,
Yeah, you didn't think they were funny. Like those jokes did not land with
they
you.
did not land with me.
Yes,
No. But I
yes.
appreciate Shrek, and that's just the two parts that I thought, oh, sad. I'm sad now.
I was the opposite because I remembered, I really liked Shrek when it came out. But again, not having seen it in forever, when I rewatched it, I was so impressed by its cleverness.
Yes.
By the way it was groundbreaking, by some of the stylistic approaches. I mean, there was so much about it where I was like, wow, okay,
Right.
wow.
I remember thinking, I cannot believe they're allowed to do this.
Yes.
I cannot believe that Disney has not sued them. And I saw one video that said the reason they didn't sue them is because they didn't specifically reference what Disney did with the characters. They're public domain characters. So they could say Sleeping Beauty or say Cinderella, but they didn't do they didn't look like the Disney versions of those.
So they were very smart in the way they did their
Right.
send-ups of
Right.
these.
But I saw on one behind this not behind the scenes, but just like facts you may not know. Radio Disney would not allow DreamWorks to buy airtime to public to advertise Shrek, and there were some lawyers that did watch it to make sure that they.
Oh, I'm sure they did.
Oh, I'm sure they did.
I guarantee they were all over it because, again, I'm making inferences here, but just based on the factual things I read, it did not sound like they were on good terms at all. Yeah, a lot of animosity, perhaps. Well, let's talk more about our impressions of the movie as we go along, whenever it seems to fit. Do you have anything else you want to share right now, or you can just jump in whenever it seems like a good time?
Okay, I'll do that.
Okay.
One thing I wanted to say: Farquaad's logo looks like the Facebook blue and white logo. That wasn't Facebook yet, but it did the blue banner and the white F. I was like, oh, Facebook before Facebook.
Maybe Facebook
got
it
the
from
idea.
Lord Farquaad.
Mark Zuckerberg watching with that looks cool.
Well, here's something else you probably knew that I did not. The movie is based on a 1990 children's book called Shrek,
did not know
by
that.
William Steig.
Yeah, I saw that and I did not remember or realize that. And he was a cartoonist?
He was absolutely a cartoonist and an illustrator for the New Yorker magazine. And he only started writing works for children when he was 60 years old. It was at the suggestion of one of his friends. But then he went on to write something like, I don't know, a couple of dozen over the next few decades.
Yeah, he passed away 2 years after Shrek came out and they dedicated Shrek 2 to him.
Oh, I didn't remember that. That's nice. Well, the word Shrek means fright or terror in Yiddish and also German. And they said, this is from one of the sources, that the 1990 tome originated the story of a misanthropic, green-headed ogre befriended by a donkey and beloved by an ogre princess. Well, DreamWorks decided they wanted to make the feature film of the book, of course, and William Steig agreed. In a Boston Globe interview, it said that he received $500,000 for the rights, which didn't end up being a lot considering what that movie and the series made. But we did see in a different interview that William Steig approved of the movie. A woman named Claudia Nawson, who for a time curated an exhibit about Steig, she was quoted in an article as saying, quote, Steig was very old by then, in his 90s, but when he went to see the movie and was asked his opinion, he said something like, it's vulgar, it's disgusting, and I love it.
Well, good. I'm glad he liked it. The bird wasn't too much for him.
So that's where the idea originated. And to talk more about how it came to be, Jeffrey Katzenberg, in that behind-the-scenes video, shared that one of the goals when they decided to make the movie was that they wanted to, quote, create the unique balance of realism and fantasy that characterizes Shrek's world. So Jeffrey said they wanted to take this fairy tale world, bring it to life, and have it feel very realistic without it being photo-realistic.
Interesting.
He said that he wanted it to be a, quote, very stylized realism. And one of the factors that would bring that out was they needed a level of humanism to their characters in terms of animation.
Sure.
So, for example, in that behind-the-scenes videos, they talked about the things that in the 2D traditional animation, you don't have to think about hair movement.
Right.
You don't have to think about
Right.
grass. They talked about the fact that they wanted Shrek to have kind of a belly that jiggled, to think about muscles. All of these things added such a level of realism, but
Right.
also such a level of complexity to their work. It was crazy how technical this made it for them.
I think I saw somewhere where it took 9 hours to render one frame of this film.
It would not surprise me.
Oh gosh, rendering is just a nightmare. Most of my life is spent waiting for videos to render. It's just when you work on something and the changes and I don't even know how to describe it. Somebody smarter than me can tell you, but it's just making the changes so that you can rewatch it. One of the reasons I switched to Final Cut, I mean, nobody's paying me to say this, so make that clear. I switched from Adobe Premiere way back in the day to Final Cut because you could, as you were working, it would render while you were working.
Oh,
and to
so
me,
it
that
saved you so much
time. Oh my
time.
gosh, yes. And Adobe Premiere may have caught up to that now. I don't know. But that was one of my reasons for switching. You spent all your life just sitting there and waiting for stuff to render.
Yeah. Wow. When it's already a very long, tedious process, you don't need that.
No.
Well, that was kind of a comment in terms of what they were trying to achieve with their animation. The other thing that Jeffrey Katzenberg said was they knew part of the fun of making this movie was that they did want it to be a little irreverent toward all of the wonderful, fun stories that everybody had grown up with. So those were kind of their goals going into this. About the cast, let's talk about them. So we've already mentioned Mike Myers and the fact that he took over when Chris Farley tragically passed away. But here's a little bit more about that. It was a good catch for the studio at the time. It was tragic that they lost Chris,
Right.
but they were fortunate that they were able to bring Mike Myers on board because this was right about the time that he was getting a lot of Austin Powers attention.
Oh, right.
he was very popular. And when they brought him in, and of course he jumped right in. He's very confident. He's very funny, but he did affect the character of Shrek. One of the animators, Ken Harsha, said in an interview that Chris Farley's appearance had already influenced how Shrek looked. He said, quote, Chris was a huge influence. He was the perfect role model. He said that Chris as an ogre was made to have a big nose, funky ears, and Tommy Boy type hair. But when Mike took over, then they started to slant Shrek towards his features. All of a sudden, Shrek had bushier eyebrows. He had a large square-shaped face, and his accent changed.
Right.
Like, he didn't have an accent at first. When Mike first came in, he tried to give it a Canadian accent. That didn't work for him, so he settled on the Scottish one.
And it cost a lot of money to redo that.
yeah,
because
all
he had
of
to
it.
redo it. But another behind the scenes thing I saw said that Mike Myers has a framed photo from Steven Spielberg thanking him for finding the right accent and for making it such a success.
Oh, how cool is that?
Another thing I found, I don't know if this is true or not, because anybody can say anything on the internet, so who knows. But I found something that said that Shrek was partially modeled after someone called Maurice Tillet. He was the French Angel, a professional wrestler and 2-time world heavyweight champion in the American Wrestling Association.
Well, that's fun.
Do you want to know what he looks like?
What does he look? Does he look like Shrek?
Shrek. Hang on, I'll show you.
Okay, we gotta put this in the show notes.
Yes. But as soon as I saw him, I went, oh, yes.
Yes.
Yes. Right?
I see that.
Yeah.
I wonder how he feels about this.
He doesn't. He passed away in the 50s.
Okay.
Yeah. He was early 1940s and was twice world heavyweight champion. So yeah, he was long gone.
Nice. I hope
the
his
time.
family takes that as a tribute.
I think that it would have been. I think he
Yeah.
was very, very beloved. He
Yeah.
was born in 1903 and passed in 1954. Russian-born French professional wrestler.
Very
So
cool.
yeah, that's from Wikipedia.
Very nice. Cameron Diaz became Princess Fiona. Did you know that there was a different
I
actor?
did. Janine Garofalo, my girl
Yes!
from Mystery Men.
You're a fan, right?
I am a fan of hers, yes. And I saw two different things. One thing said that she had no idea why she was let go after Chris Farley, he was replaced. And the other thing said that she was let go because originally she was supposed to be sarcastic and Chris Farley was supposed to be very sweet and timid. And they swapped it to where now Mike Myers is more sarcastic and Fiona was more Swedish.
That's interesting. I did not do the deep dive. I just came across this one article, and it was an Insider Magazine quote, and all it said was that they were referencing an interview she'd given for Vulture, and in that she had said, quote, I was never told why I was
Right,
fired.
yeah.
I assume because I sound like a man sometimes. I don't know why. Nobody told me.
Okay, so
Yeah.
they're going with she didn't know.
She didn't know. Well, Cameron Diaz, of course, made a beautiful Princess Fiona. She was so good in that role. They said at the time that she was hired, she had not yet had her breakout role. They consider it to be there's something about Mary, which made her popularity just skyrocket. But she talked about the fact that she really loved this role. So I'm going to ask you to read this quote from her,
Sure.
Ashley.
She says, when I met Fiona, she was just a young princess, faltering and fumbling, trying to find her place and make her way through a set of circumstances that were decided for her. She learned that she could and should be proud of her true self. From that base of strength and confidence, I got to stay with her. She blossomed into a wonderful partner to Shrek, a mother, a leader, thriving as a result of her perseverance, bravery, and the kind and wise people she met along the way. I originally was drawn to Fiona's quest for self-love and acceptance, and ultimately, we went on that adventure together. It is so rare to be with a character for a span of 4 films and to be able to see a character grow. To be a part of her journey has been such a gift.
So that actually appeared in the foreword of a DreamWorks animation book that came out several years back now to celebrate its 25th anniversary. But I really thought we should share that because I liked how she talked about the sequels and the journey of growth that she got to experience alongside that character.
Something that kind of struck me as I was watching is I wondered if this was sort of a play on Beauty and the Beast, because it was sort of a reversal of that. Instead of the Beast turning into a human, now we have the princess turning, I'm going to say beast loosely, of course, ogres were considered beasts. But I thought there was a lot of stuff similar to that, you know?
Absolutely. In fact, in my rewatch notes, that's one of the things I put down was I saw where they had elements or hints of Beauty and the Beast,
Right.
especially when they were coming after him with that
the
whole kill the
pitchforks.
beast scene.
Yes.
Yeah. But one of the things that came up in my mind, but also in a lot of the sources I saw of the reviews, was the fact that it was the whole anti-hero idea.
I just wrote that, yes,
Yeah.
Shrek is a true anti-hero.
That's exactly
Yeah.
what he is. He's an anti-hero, and it's such a celebration of that. And so they do the same thing with Fiona. They take all of these expectations and these tropes and
Yeah.
these cliches,
Right.
and they turn them all on their head.
Right, and she starts off as a trope. You're supposed to rescue me. Now we're
Right.
supposed to have true love's kiss. This is the way it's all supposed to be.
Right.
And it's not the way it's going to be.
Right. And every bit of that is just beautifully done.
It
and
is.
that's another reason why I was so impressed with this film.
I really was impressed with the plot. I thought it was a really good plot, although we had Bob and Betty vibes later on when, he overheard just a little bit
yes,
and they
and
get
they-
mad at each other. I'm like, just talk about it. Oh my gosh. So I got a little mad at him there. But yeah, I mean, it was really good.
Plot device. We have to have
I know.
Yeah. Well, Eddie Murphy, of course, played the donkey, and he, like Mike Myers, was a very good catch for the studio because I don't know if you guys can think about this contextually, but if you'll recall, through the 90s, this man was killing it. Not only doing some films, but he had also started to make that crossover into animation. He was Mushu in Mulan.
So he was Mushu first.
Yes, in
Okay.
1998. So
Okay.
wildly popular.
Right.
And not only was he a good catch in terms of star power, he really affected this film as well. In fact, here is a quote from director Andrew Adamson talking about Eddie Murphy as the donkey. You'd pitch him a sequence and you'd show him the pages and he'd read it very quietly, just kind of to himself. And then he'd step in front of the microphone and just bam, instantly it's donkey. He'd come up with stuff we'd never even imagined. He'd take a single beat joke and turn it into a 3-beat joke.
It's amazing. My notes, I said Eddie Murphy as Donkey is one of the greatest voice castings of all time, like the genie in Aladdin.
Yeah.
It was great.
Yeah, wonderful.
He made that. I mean, they all were wonderful, but if you don't have that right sidekick, boy, he was great.
Because a buddy film,
Yeah.
that's part of what this was. Like you could give it so many different labels, but one of the really important labels was this was a buddy film, and Donkey is the one who helped Shrek see that he was lovable and
Right.
that he was great the way he
Right.
was, and that he could be the hero.
Right. I have later on the scene at night. Donkey is right. Why keep secrets? And they had a really grown up conversation about their feelings, and they forgive each other.
Yes.
I really like that sequence where they talked it out and they actually talked to each other, which is what you should do.
And this was in a children's story,
Yes.
which, by the way, we haven't said this yet, but it was clearly a children's story that was also just as much for adults. And that's what another part of what made it so, I think, critically acclaimed and so
The whole
popular.
family could find something.
Yes, everybody could learn from it. Everybody could enjoy it. It was beautifully done.
I
thought.
also wrote that Donkey is definitely an extrovert and Shrek is definitely an introvert. That's like an
Yes.
extrovert adopting an introvert.
Okay, we're kind of hitting on some thematic things now, I know, but that was another thing that was so well done was they portrayed Shrek's isolation, his loneliness, his, what's the word, not fitting in with society. They did such a beautiful job with it, and the way that Donkey
Pulled it
managed
out.
to go in there and pull him out of it.
Yep.
It was goodness. Love it. Well, so the leads, I don't know about some of the other voice actors, but the leads, according to a New York Post article, speaking specifically about Mike Myers, Eddie Murphy, and Cameron Diaz, were paid $350,000 each, which was pretty modest
That's peanuts.
for this. Yes.
Yeah.
It's going to change.
Oh, I bet.
It's gonna
I
change.
bet. Shrek 2, they're like, excuse me, what now?
Yeah,
Let's
yeah.
renegotiate.
I'll go ahead and tell you.
Yeah.
According to one source, it was $10 million for the sequel.
For each of them?
That's what it said. Now, I did not look that up. I did not corroborate across multiple
Sure.
sources, but that's what one credible source said.
Holy cats.
Yeah. Well, John Lithgow played Lord Farquaad, of course, and in the behind-the-scenes video that I've now mentioned several times, Jeffrey Katzenberg, again, talks about, in this case, John Lithgow. He calls him incredibly gifted, talks about the wide range of characters that he's portrayed over the years, and he comments, quote, John as a villain in a comedy is a riot. So he obviously was a huge part of the success too.
Was.
He
They
did
all
such
were.
a good
It was
job.
very, very
Yeah.
well cast.
And it was kind of cute. You know, John Lithgow, I think, has a great sense of humor. In a 2009 interview with the Los Angeles Times, he was quoted as saying, "I always said I would never play anyone short. And then came Lord Farquaad."
I forgot that Lord Farquaad got eaten. I completely forgot. Because they get married.
Yeah.
They're married. And he's like, my wife. And I thought, how in the world does she get out of this? And then, oh, that's how. I forgot.
Yeah, there was a lot I had forgotten, actually. It was very enjoyable for me doing
when it
this
happened,
rewatch.
Brian just went, did he just get eaten? And then she spits out the crown. He goes, I guess so. It's just like, wow. Well, all right. She just inherited a kingdom. She's a widow now. It's all good.
It's all good.
It's all good.
To talk about the process, there's so much here. We're not obviously going to hit it all, but I think this fits nicely here because we just got through talking about the cast.
Sure.
And a huge part of the process, you've already alluded to it, involves how the cast affects the story itself.
Mm-hmm.
So this came up time and again as I was doing my research. This process is so complicated, and it took, in this case, 4.5 years. I think they had so many issues with Shrek. In fact, in some cases, they talked about the fact that it almost became that project that nobody wanted to do, like almost a punishment. Like, oh,
Sure.
you're not working out over here. We're going to put you over here on Shrek.
No,
like
not
it kind of
Shrek.
fell into no man's land for a while. So it took longer than other movies, I think. But animation in general is still a long process, even if it's something that's clicking along well.
Right.
But in this case, they were struggling. Shrek went through a number of different versions. It went through a number of different directors. They finally settled into their official vision and the team that would kind of stay with it. And then one of the comments that was made was by Jeffrey again, who said that there are so many elements that have to come together when you are making an animated movie, but that the actors have to come in very early in the process.
Right.
And Cameron Diaz, by the way, shared in a talk show interview, I heard her say this herself, that she really only worked like 2 days on Shrek 1.
nuts.
I know. But their process was fascinating. This is a longer clip. It's about 3 minutes, just slightly over. But I think you're going to enjoy it. This
Okay.
is from that same video where you're going to hear the leads talking about the process that they followed when they were making Shrek.
I didn't know what to expect. I had no idea. I never knew anything about the process. They said Eddie Murphy and Mike Myers were going to be in the movie. So I expected to sort of walk into a room with the two guys there and us be like, doing our lines off one another. And instead I got a storyboard and a pointer stick. Sort of running across the bottom in dialogue and explaining to me, and I was like, oh, okay, I get this is a different process.
You just kind of act yourself through it and then
Right.
get to, and that way you'll have full breath and everything for that.
Thy deed is great, and thine heart is pure. I didn't have anything in my head from.
The actors who perform are in a curious little bubble. We're in an isolation booth. We only see it from our own peculiar little angle. In fact, in the whole course of this project, I'll never even lay eyes on Eddie Murphy or Mike or Cameron. We have dialogues together, and we end up in very intimate contact with each other, at least our voices do, in the film.
What kind of knight are you?
One of a kind.
What kind of knight are you?
One of a kind. Yeah, it's kind of interesting. First of all, it takes a long time. It's kind of like doing a movie and then sending it out to space, and then 100 years later, an alien comes by and said, I saw it, it was pretty good. Pretty good.
Doing something like this, it's more collaborative than when I'm just, it's just me and what I would do with my body and my face and my approach to a scene. And I found that the director and people involved are really specific about what they want. So they kind of talk you through things.
Yeah, really, and try one, just go a bit over the top, really upset with yourself. Really upset that you're still afraid of the dark. You haven't conquered that fear.
Well, don't feel bad, Princess. I used to be afraid of the dark, too. Until... Hey, no, wait. I'm still afraid of the dark.
And then you see that, them draw, how they wanted your voice to go because he was a little more this in the scene. He was a little more angry or he was a little scared. See that come out,
They've got terrific shorthand, and they're very good at talking to actors.
They do videotape you as you work, but they say that no one's going to ever see them. And I have that in writing, I think.
The animators love to watch Cameron Diaz.
You did it! You paradox, I'll admit. They take that and they sort of like use that as a guidelines to sort of get some gestures of, when you're screaming or moving around.
It's just so helpful because sometimes it's not so much about the body language, because when they're doing recording, most of the time they're just standing there looking at a piece of paper. But it's the detail of the face. Whatever was going on their faces while they were talking is so special.
Wasn't that amazing?
That really was. It lets you know how nuanced and how specific, because they can't waste any kind of film or they can't waste any animation. They need it to be exactly what they need it to be.
You all watching that, Cameron Diaz in particular, you saw all the voice actors, well, the leads anyway, doing their lines. And there's some movement. There's great facial expression from all of them. Cameron Diaz is standing up, straight up acting.
Yes.
Like her gesturing is beautiful. And when you watch, you can see why they said that. I don't know if you could tell that animators said, we loved watching Cameron Diaz because the gestures that you were seeing her do, you see Princess Fiona do many of those in the film.
Yeah.
They took it straight from what she was performing as she was recording those lines. I thought that was I thought it was fascinating to watch, but it helped me understand the process and what they can take from their actors.
Yeah, and I loved how respectful they all were of the vision, the original vision. Like even Eddie Murphy, who loves to riff and do all of this stuff, how respectful he was of, here's how I want you to do it. Okay, I'll do it that way,
And just since you guys couldn't see it, again, check out the video if you're interested. It's wonderful. But what those actors had at that point was basically a storyboard. You saw on this wall where they had kind of the outline of the scene that they were getting ready to record. And with that pointer, somebody from the team was going through like, here's what's happening and here's what you're going to be saying. Here's how you're feeling and here's how you're reacting. And then they put them in that recording booth and they have their headphones on and they're watching the scene ahead of them. And in front of them is a stand with their lines. And they're just recording as they're watching the scene. So that's what they're going from. And they're doing this very early in this animation process when this movie has not been made at all. It's just basically a storyboard.
I like what Mike Myers said about it's something you make and then you send it up to space and 100 years later an alien goes, yeah, it was pretty good. Because you just do it and then years and years later you forget that it was done. You're like, oh yeah, I did that. Now it's coming out. That's cool.
Hope it's good.
Hope it's good.
Hope people like it.
Yeah.
Why don't we take a quick break before we go on?
Okay.
Do you love tea? Do you love entertainment? Do you love listening to stories from your two new BFFs? Then consider joining the club over at buymeacoffee.com. For $5 per month, you can be a part of the 1939 Club, otherwise known as the Golden Year of Cinema. When Gone with the Wind, Mr. Smith Goes to Washington, Stagecoach, Of Mice and Men, Wuthering Heights, Hound of the Baskervilles, The Little Princess, Babes in Arms, Goodbye Mr. Chips, The Hunchback of Notre Dame, and of course, The Wizard of Oz were released. Perks include a 5% discount on new merchandise, a shout out for new members, an opportunity to be listed as a supporter in show notes, and exclusive access to bonus content. However, if you're feeling doubly generous, you can join the 1993 Club, otherwise known as the greatest year of cinema. This is the year that Schindler's List, The Sandlot, The Fugitive, Rudy, Robin Hood, Men in Tights, Sleepless in Seattle, The Nightmare Before Christmas, Mrs. Doubtfire, Grumpy Old Men, and of course, Jurassic Park were released. Additional perks in this club include a 10% discount on Scandalwater merchandise, the opportunity to record a shout-out of your own, and the chance to vote in our guaranteed content poll, along with the warm and sunny feeling that you're supporting your besties. If clubbing isn't your thing, there's a one-time gift option too. Either way, those who support Scandalwater report fewer bad hair days, more green lights in traffic, and a grander sense of purpose and wonder at least once per day. Scandalwater, we do the research, so you don't have to.
All right, we are back to continue talking about Shrek. I'm going to tell you, when I went into this episode, I thought it was really going to be just the content. Like, we're just going to kind of talk about the movie. I got so caught up in the fact that it was an animated film and the process they followed and what it took to bring this to life, because I really was very uninformed about this. This was just fascinating. So we could talk about this for a long time. We're not going to, guys. I'm going to hit one or two little highlights. Here are a couple things that really struck me. One of the challenges they talked about was was that this was basically the first animated film where they were really trying to make it three-dimensional. Like they were trying to make this full out 3D, lots of texture, lots of dimension. And Vicki Jensen, one of the two directors, said that she felt like they were creating something that had never been seen before with the approach that they were using. It called in not only the things I've already said, but lighting, the number of props that they would put in a scene. There were so many things that helped to make it that extra dimension. Some of the challenges with the approach that they were trying to do involved the fact that they had something like 50 different locations, which meant creating a set for every one of those locations.
Right.
And they also they talked about the fact that so much of this was CGI and how complicated it was. It kind of makes me think of what you were talking about with rendering. Those little pieces that you wouldn't expect would be so important or so complicated ends up being super complicated. This is what I thought was a fun little story. It is very short. It is like 25 seconds. From that video, this is Ken Bylenberg, the visual effects supervisor on the film. He's giving an example, I think, that shows how complex a process this was.
Everything's a case of trial and error. For instance, we had shots of Donkey. It was actually someone's first day in production, and they made one change which they thought was an innocent change, and the next day we got back renders from about half a dozen shots with Donkey looking like a chia pet.
Kick it to the curb. Don't mess with me. I'm the stand master. I've mastered the stands. I wish I had a step right here, now. I step all over it.
It's just so adorable. We've saved those, and we look back at them every once in a while for a good laugh.
I heard that story.
Had you heard that before?
Yeah, I did, and and it was somebody who was just trying to help, and I so sympathized with those people. They went home. It's 9 hours to render. You go home, you come back, and you're like, what has happened? But then they kept it because he was so cute and fuzzy.
It was adorable. I showed Ashley the video of it. But I think that's the kind of process this is, when one person making one little change can undo the work that you've been doing for months at a time. I mean, that's a scary process.
I have so much admiration. Can I just say, so much admiration for people who make these Pixar style, I don't know what else to call it, the 3D animation, cartoonist, stop motion people. I do not have the patience. I do not have the fortitude to get through this. I just be like, well, I guess we're never going to have Shrek because I am just not called to this line of business.
Yeah.
But I admire them so much.
Oh, me too. It is such a talent, such a skill. And they talked about in this approach they were using, the 3D, very rich textures, that type of thing. They said that the simple things would be incredibly difficult to make look realistic using CGI. For example, water, mud, fire, pouring milk. Those seem like the simplest little things, and it might only be a few seconds in the film, but it would be this monumental process for them. So I believe this is the last clip I'm going to share with you, but this is where Mike Myers and a few different animators chime in briefly to discuss fire.
My favorite moment in the movie is the moment where Shrek and Donkey save Fiona from the castle and they're being chased by the dragon.
Hi, princess!
It talks! Yeah, it's getting them to shut up, that's the trick!
The animation is amazing. You see them being chased by this big ball of fire, and every turn in this movie is amazing because there's a new visual effect that just blows your mind.
The fire on Shrek is, for the most part, CG. In this sequence, the fire it's almost a character itself as far as needing to move through the scene and interact with the characters.
Basically, we started off with just a very simple ball. And we just animated the ball at the camera to get the timing right, and they started building their effects on top of that timing. So we'd have a simplified bunch of triangles just fly out at you, and then it would get slightly more blobby, more detailed, and then finally you see in lighting, you see amazing effects coming out at you straight at your face.
That's insane.
So I know you guys couldn't see it. Ashley, do you want to describe just really briefly what you noticed there as you were watching?
It kind of looked like the Indiana Jones ball, Raiders of the Lost Ark, where it comes and it had little triangles. It was a red ball that was chasing after them, and then it turned into like gray bubbles, and then it turned into a fire witch through some kind of sorcery. I don't know. I don't know what the transfer process was, but that's insane. It's just crazy.
It is. I mean, to see that behind the scenes look at it, I just found that so interesting.
I also want to say at this point, I felt sorry for Dragon.
I
did.
Yeah.
She was sad and lonely. She just needed a friend.
But see, it had a happy
It
ending.
did for her, too.
Yes, that's another great thing
She
about
just
this movie.
looked really sad.
But one more thing about that video clip. I loved how the visual effects supervisor said fire is almost like a character itself.
Yeah.
Like that's how these people are thinking. They have such an artistic approach to everything. He said, we had to think about how fire interacted with the characters and move that scene forward.
I know.
I'm like, you all are genius
That's
people.
why they're in charge of Shrek.
And making
we're
a
not.
lot of money.
And we're not.
So I think all this brings us to the point that I was trying to kind of emphasize here. This was incredibly groundbreaking work. This is the kind of thing that made Shrek so different and so impressive for this time period, which again was 2001.
Right.
It's why it won awards. Eddie Murphy commented that he himself was blown away the first time he saw the movie. He said it was amazing what they did visually, and he talked about how far animation had come. And then, this is all in that same video, Jeffrey Katzenberg then commented, the amazing thing is how revolutionary the computer has been in animation.
Yeah.
Not evolutionary, but revolutionary. And so this was where they were at this time. They were revolutionizing this industry with the work they were doing.
It really, really was. And you mentioned early on that it won Best Animated Feature at the Oscars. I don't know if it was clear enough that they were the first recipient.
The very first ever.
And another thing I noticed, or another thing I saw, was that Shrek has a star now on the Hollywood Walk of Fame.
Aww.
In 2010, he was granted a star. He is one of only 15 fictional characters who has a star.
That is so cool.
I still want us to do an episode one day on how you get a star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame, but Shrek is one of them.
Shrek is one of them. Well, talking about prestige, Shrek actually premiered at the Cannes Film Festival.
I saw that too.
Yeah. So that says to me, if Shrek got chosen to be sent there for its premiere, everybody recognized that this was going to be something special and groundbreaking. But it was cute because one of those directors, Andrew Adamson, he commented in an interview that when they were sitting there at the premiere, he said, I said, this is just going to be a disaster. This is not the right audience for this film. The song, the animation, everything about this was a poor choice to be bringing here.
Yeah.
And he talked about how the audience was absolutely quiet for the first 10 minutes or so of the film. He thought they hated it. But I think in retrospect, he thought they were just trying to figure out
what's going
on. Like this was so different. Like the irreverence, the fact that this was not your typical animated film for children. And he said it took a while and slowly they seemed to be getting it. And by the time it ended at the Cannes Film Festival, Shrek got a standing ovation that this director remembered as being 12 minutes long,
What in the world?
according to something he said in a 2021 article published by The Ringer.
I hear about that all the time. These standing ovations that last 6, 12, 15 minutes. I could not stand there and clap for 15 minutes.
That's craziness.
Yes. I'm finding out through this podcast how lazy I actually am, Candy. I cannot do this. I cannot do that. I couldn't clap for 15 minutes. I'd be like, good job. And I'd sit back
my
down.
hands would hurt.
My hands would hurt.
Well, the movie went on to gross $42 million its first weekend, which was the biggest opening for DreamWorks to that point. And as we've already said, ultimately it brought in something like $484 million in worldwide sales. In a 2007 interview with The Age, co-founder, same guy we keep talking about, Jeffrey Katzenberg said, quote, that first Shrek saved the company financially. We are here today because of it. It's been a great blessing. I refer to it as the gift that keeps on giving.
I bet he does.
Something we've not yet talked about was the incredibly successful soundtrack. Do you remember any of the songs from that?
Somebody once told me. Yes. And that was it. Also, Mystery Men did it first. They had that song first.
The Smash Mouth All-Star had already been out for a while.
Right.
In fact, they tried to find a different song because it was already
in Mystery Men and other places.
Yes.
But it was just a holder track, but people loved it so much they kept it, which led to them doing the last song,
I'm a Believer.
I'm a Believer. And they used that song because of the line, I thought love was only true in fairy tales.
Yes.
Boom.
And Smash Mouth was reluctant to do it at first. Ultimately, so happy and excited that they did it.
I bet.
Yeah. Well, I don't know. Do you remember back in 2001, 2002, listening to that soundtrack yourself? Because my family did. We listened to that.
Sure.
Yeah.
I loved it.
Now, I wanted to go down this rabbit trail just a tiny bit because one of the things I always admire about artistic works, whether it's a film or something else, is when everything is so intentional and everything is so tightly interwoven. And so this same 2021 Ringer article I mentioned just a moment ago, it was written all about the musical significance of Shrek. And here's a quote from that article. Its signature contribution to the culture and the main fuel for nostalgia among millennials may be its boundary-smashing use of licensed popular songs,
Right.
especially All-Star, I'm a Believer, and Hallelujah.
Right.
Shrek was the first animated picture to have in its dialogue and in its music pop references, says Mary Lotta Elton, Shrek's music supervisor. They did this intentionally. They said one of their motivations in going the route of pop songs versus an original score was to try to separate themselves from Disney and other of common animators of the time. But this same lady, the music supervisor, went on to say, quote, I wanted to really have our projects, our vocals, our everything be different than the classic Disney sound or what animation has known to be in music. So the idea that the filmmakers were going to put in pop songs hadn't been done before, but they also went on to say everything about this film was about flipping expectations on its head. And so here you are in a movie that seems to be set in medieval times and you're playing
Modern music.
Yeah,
I hadn't thought of that.
everything helped reinforce that theme of nothing's as you expect.
Right. And then when you would hear those songs on the radio, you're going to think about Shrek.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And that soundtrack climbed to the top of the Billboard chart. It went multi-platinum. The soundtrack, Shrek 2, also hit #1 and went platinum as well. So this same lady, one last quote, she said, what ended up happening is that Shrek became pop culture itself.
Interesting.
So Ashley's already said this. The movie was nominated for Best Adapted Screenplay and Best Animated Feature, took home the Oscar for the second one. First ever Oscar given in the category of Best Animated Feature. And also, people noted that it was usually Disney that took this, so it was a huge upset in that respect. We obviously had several sequels that came from this. Shrek 2 in 2004, which also opened at the Cannes Film Festival.
And I saw, and I'm going to get this wrong because I watched a lot of videos, but I think they said something like the opening weekend of Shrek 2 is still the biggest opening for an animated picture ever, even with Frozen and stuff.
That would not surprise me, but it surpassed the original. Like it, I mean, it was such a hit. Shrek the Third was 2007, and Shrek Forever After was 2010. And we also had some Puss in the Boots spin-off films.
I liked
in the
Puss in
TV
Boots.
series.
I liked Antonio Banderas in that character.
They also developed a Broadway musical of Shrek.
I have seen it.
Really?
Not on Broadway.
Oh,
Oh,
okay.
for Pete's sake, no. I haven't been to Broadway and seen that. No, I've seen community theater productions of it.
Is it good?
Yeah, it's good.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, it ran from 2008 to 2010 on Broadway. Did you know that Sutton Foster played Princess Fiona?
I did not.
And Shrek was chosen as one of the 25 movies added to the National Film Registry of the Library of Congress in 2020. And one last quote from that Ringer article that I've mentioned a few times. This was, by the way, an article that came out to commemorate the film's 20th anniversary, so it's been a few years ago. But it said, from a billion-dollar film franchise and Broadway musical to a theme park ride and a plethora of modern-day memes, there's no denying the cultural impact of the green ogre. Shrek changed the animation game forever.
Armchair psychologist.
For our armchair, Ashley, I know we both watched it. We've mentioned that several times. I just thought I would open this to what other notes, comments, thoughts did we want to share that we've not had a chance to address yet?
I've actually only got a few because
Okay.
we've talked about most of them throughout it. One thing that I talked about early on is that Shrek immediately shows us that he's literally going to turn fairy tales on their head. He's just, it's not going to be like what you thought it was, where he's reading in the book and then he rips it out and what he uses the page for. It's like, oh, this is not going to be what I thought it was. And then I'm going to skip to the Dark Night of the Soul, where all is lost for our three friends in the montage. I really like how they did it, where they showed them at a table and then you'd show him eating his dinner and it would fade out and show her in the castle, and just how they were all so sad without each other. I thought it was a really good sequence of the Dark Night of the Soul. And the last thing that I made a note of that we haven't talked about, I have two things. One of the last things about actually Shrek is, if you notice that at the end, their carriage was an onion.
Oh,
You know, where he talks about we have layers, so they left an onion.
How cool.
Yeah, and this is a little trivia that I saw about Shrek 2. So this isn't about the original film, but in Shrek 2, when the fairy tale creatures rescue Puss in Boots, Donkey, and Shrek, the music is the theme to Mission Impossible.
fun.
Isn't that fun?
Yes,
yes,
it is. I like that.
Very interesting.
We've already talked about a lot of my notes as well. A couple of other things, I think, just to piggyback on what we'd already said, actually. The cleverness and the fact that a lot of that cleverness came through pop culture references. Like, for example, using the dating game to introduce the princesses.
Big three.
Or having the muffin, when he actually says the lines of, do you know the muffin man?
It lives on Drury Lane.
Yes. I mean, you're literally, how could you not laugh?
Yeah.
Like, how could you not laugh? It was just so clever, and it was such an intelligent film.
It really was intelligent.
Yes.
As far as, even though it was irreverent and all of that, it really was well written.
It was.
And I liked it.
I go back again to what does it take to make a great film? And when it can make you laugh, but also still make you love characters, get you emotionally invested, make you almost tear up in an animated film. Like, there were moments when you felt the loneliness or the isolation. You were rooting for them to get together. You know, when you can get an audience to do that through basically what they're calling a children's movie, that's some talent.
It really, really, really is.
Yeah. And I agree with you. A lot of the humor came from Donkey. By the way, we haven't yet said this. You know, there's a lot of talk about a new sequel.
No kidding.
Oh, yeah.
I did not know that.
In fact, I did not, do the deep dive. I just kept coming across different articles just in passing where at first it was like Cameron Diaz doesn't want to be on board because she's now retired from acting again and she wants to be with her family. But then I saw where, no, now all the leads are in talks and they seem willing to be back again. So not sure, but it sounds as though there's a good possibility that we may have another sequel.
Interesting.
Eddie Murphy has also been quoted as saying he thinks Donkey needs a spinoff. He likes Puss in the Boots. He gave props to Puss in the Boots, but he said Donkey's funnier than that character. We need a Donkey spinoff.
I wonder what Donkey would do though. Would it be a prequel or what?
I have no idea.
I don't know. Usually,
but Eddie Murphy, he'll help come up with it.
I'm sure he will. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that seems like a good place to end this. So a big cheers to all the people involved with this production because talk about a team effort.
Yes.
So much skill, so much talent.
We really admire you all and your patience.
Yeah.
I admire their patience and their creativity and artistry.
All of it. All of it. And William Steig, too, for having the original idea.
Sure.
So a big cheers to everyone involved with Shrek. Cheers.
Cheers.
If you love what we do, please rate and review our show. Or you can become a supporter by making a donation through buymeacoffee.com/scandalwaterpod. Whether a single gift or a recurring monthly donation, it would go a long way towards supporting our work and allowing us to keep the tea brewing.
At our website, www.scandalwaterpodcast.com, you can submit questions or your own story ideas, access our sources and show notes, see the merch we offer for sale, and more. You can join the Scandal Water community through our Scandal Water Podcast Facebook page or follow us on Instagram or TikTok at Scandal Water Podcast.
This episode was executive produced by Candy Thomas, that's me, and Ashley Raymer Brown,
that's me.
It was researched and written by Candy Thomas and edited by Ashley Raymer Brown.
A special thank you to Josh Martin, who wrote, composed, and performed the Scandal Water theme and other music. Matt C. Adams, who created the artwork, and Joshua Reith, who designed our website and provides ongoing technical support.
As a reminder, this podcast is purely for entertainment purposes. The thoughts and opinions of the host during each episode of Scandal Water are their own and do not reflect the opinions of any future guests, advertisers, or clearly professional psychologists. Thanks for listening.